42.2 kilometers, 26.2 miles in 3 hours, 12 minutes and 42 seconds. Averaging 4 minutes 34 per kilometre or 7 minutes 21 per mile. The Manchester Marathon 2023 was a 24-minute personal best. So 10 days later, here is my race recap. I'm dividing the video up into 4 sections. I'll put the timestamps on. First of all, what were the goals of the day and what was the race strategy? Second, the actual race execution itself. Third, some training stats. And finally, the single biggest thing that I learnt doing the Manchester Marathon. So let's talk about goals and strategy. As per my race strategy video, I had assessed my fitness to be in or around the 3 hours 15 to 3 hours 10 marathon shape. And I was confident that I could reach my potential on the day, whatever that was going to be, because I'd just had my best ever training block, the taper had gone well, I'd reduced the stress on my body the day before, and conditions ended up being good on race day. They were overcast and between 10 and 12 degrees C. And all of that contributed to me just not feeling nervous at all about the race. I was completely relaxed. I was there to have fun, and everything that could go right had gone right up until this point. And in all honesty, I had no expectations that anyone would come and say hi to me and recognise me from the videos, so I really do appreciate that you came up to say hello to me. And I have to say, you're all a really friendly bunch. Anyway, going for a sub 3 hours 15 was definitely on. It was just a question of how far sub 3:15 that I wanted to go. How aggressive did I want to be? And in the end, it turned out not that aggressive, because I was never set on doing a sub 3 hours 10 marathon, because I was cautious that might be a bit too aggressive. I mean, I was aggressive and greedy last time at Brighton and I got my fingers burned. So I got to work the week before on a pace chart. I selected some points along the course, all of the 5k points and some of the mile markers, and then timings of where I wanted to be. I then set that up as a spreadsheet on the laptop. I took a screenshot of it and then set it as the background on my phone, so that all I had to do on race day was take out my phone and I'd see the pace chart straight away. And really the goals on the day were to, 1, try and hit the timings on the pace chart, but 2, more importantly, get to halfway still feeling okay. And the most important, get to mile 20 not going anaerobic. And for me, that means keeping the heart rate under 170. All right, let's talk about the race and the execution itself. First of all, I had a really good night's sleep. I dozed off about 9:30 the day before, woke up naturally at about 5:30, even though I'd set the alarm for 6. As soon as I woke up, I had my water with the electrolytes, I had my breakfast, which was the overnight oats that I'd prepared the night before, and then wanted to leave the hotel at about 7:30, knowing that the race starts at 9:20. So as for the toilet situation, I'd managed to go before I left the hotel. I then went at the event village at about 8:30, and then I went one more time just after 9 o'clock at the start line. Now, I had the vast majority of my water all before 7:30 whilst I was still at the hotel, and then what I did is I took a bottle of water with me to the start line, and about 5-10 minutes before the start I sipped on that a little bit, which would keep me nicely hydrated for the start of the race. As for gels, electrolytes and water in general, I think that went really well on the day. The gels went down no problem at all. I had a caffeine gel at the start line, and then I had 6 more gels every 30 minutes, and the 7th gel I had at 25 miles, and that went down okay. So no complaints with them. And as for the water stations were every 5 kilometers roughly. Took water at every single station along with one of my electrolyte tablets. That was great. As for the watch setup, first of all, auto lap was off and I manually lapped at the 5 kilometer markers on the course. And the data fields that I was particularly interested in were heart rate, current lap pace, current lap time, previous lap time, lap distance, and of course total time. Now, the thing to note with watches is that they will measure a little bit short over the course. So in my case, it ended up measuring 42.61 kilometers at a 4:31 per kilometer average pace. But of course, we know the course measured 42.2 kilometers, and therefore the average pace was more around 4:34. So just bear that in mind as I switch between the two stats. As for the first 10k, I found the 3 hours 15 pace group, and I wanted to run just in front of them for the first few kilometers. And then we had a nice downhill start to kick things off. I felt like I found the perfect place in the group because it wasn't too overly crowded. Everyone was running at more or less the same pace, so there was no weaving in and out to overtake each other. So I passed the first mile at 7 minutes 20, the second mile at 14 minutes 50, and then the first 5k in 22:50. A few seconds ahead of where I wanted to be at this point, but I was just pleased that I'd found the perfect place in the race. Everyone seemed to be running about 4 minutes 35 per kilometre, 7:20 per mile. Every now and then I'd just have a look over my shoulder and I'd see the 3:15 pacer behind me. So you get into the city centre, into the Deansgate area, there's loads of crowd, cheering and noise, which is fantastic. But you do find yourselves running just a little bit faster when the crowds go, so I did have to remind myself just to slow down a little bit. Officially for the 10k I came through in 46:03. Heart rate monitor hadn't kicked in for some reason. Maybe it's because I started it earlier before the start line to make sure you get the GPS signals before you hit the actual start button. But nonetheless, after about 10k, it did start giving me what seemed like sensible readings. So I assume that's when the wrist heart rate kicked in. Anyway, in the first two 5k splits, the watch is telling me that I'm running at about 4:34 per kilometre and then 4:31 per kilometre, which was still a little bit quicker than the plan. As for the second 10k, you go through some back roads, some side roads, through an industrial area, round by the Old Trafford football stadium. It's a little bit quiet around there, but very soon you end up on Chester Road, which is the big long main road where all the noise and the crowds and the support reappear. As soon as I got onto Chester Road, I could feel a slight breeze we were heading into, so I was just conscious of that. Just come onto what looks like to be Chester Road, a bit into the wind now, got to pace it sensibly. But I was also thinking, great, we're going to get this breeze on the way back and it's going to be helpful. I passed the 15k marker in 1 hour, 8 minutes and 51 seconds. And at this point, I was expecting to be a little bit further ahead of the 3:15 pacers than I actually was. I looked over my shoulder and they were very close behind me. So I thought to myself, better get a move on. So I can't work this out. I'm only just ahead of the 3:15 pacers. I'm definitely ahead of 3:15 pace. I then get to the 20k point in 1 hour, 31:59 seconds. I'm only 9 seconds behind the plan. Everything's feeling good. I then get to the halfway point in 1 hour, 36 minutes and 46 seconds. The heart rate is staying nice and low at high 150s, low 160s. So I've ended up achieving the first goal, which was to get to the halfway point still feeling okay. Here's the halfway. Still feeling okay. Those 5k splits for the second 10k, the watch was telling me at this point that the average paces for those 5k splits were 4:32 and 4:34. Given that was slightly into the breeze, I was very happy with that. So let's talk about the third 10k. I knew to expect a few lumps and bumps here, including the hill at Altrincham at mile 16. But I'm completely prepared, I know what to expect. The idea is that I'm just going to slow down up the hills because I want to get to mile 20 without going anaerobic. So the first incline of note passed at around 25 kilometres. You go over this flyover bridge. Now, according to the timings, I'm about 30 seconds where I wanted to be off the pace chart at this point. Yet when I look back now at Strava, it's telling me I've done my fastest 5k to that point. And I do remember thinking just after that halfway point, that let's try and squeeze a few extra seconds out of the next 5k. 25k was also the point where, for the very first time, I just started feeling some fatigue in the legs, but it was just a feeling and nothing to worry about. I then get to the hill in Altrincham, mile 16. Now, I had actually driven round there the day before when we arrived, so I kind of knew what to expect. And in all fairness, I was expecting that at mile 16, that I'd find the hill harder than I did. But I deliberately slowed down. It looks like I slowed down to about 4:53 per kilometre pace, and just making sure the heart rate is still not going anaerobic, and it looks like it got to 168, which is great. Didn't go anaerobic once, and then recovered nice and quick to the low 160s shortly afterwards. I then decided to take advantage of the downhill afterwards and clocked a 4:21 kilometre. Great fun going through Altrincham. The noise and the support there was also great, just how we like it. So at this point in the second half of that third 10k, I'm thinking we still want to keep in the 4:30 kilometres if possible, keeping the heart rate in the mid 160s. I get to mile 17 and it looks like I'm about 30 seconds behind where I wanted to be, but I'm still of this mindset that I'm not interested in making up time now. at the cost of going anaerobic. Also at this point, I'm feeling the first signs of cramp, so I run in such a way that I feel like I'm stretching it out a little bit. Whether I'm actually doing anything or not, probably not. But a few minutes later, it then seemed to go away, and I didn't feel it again for the rest of the race. So I passed 30 kilometers in 2 hours 17:44, which is about 50 seconds now behind where I wanted to be. At this point, I'm realizing, oh yeah, the course measure's a little bit longer than my watch does. The heart rate is creeping into the high 160s now. And we also go down this nice tree-lined road. I think it's called Brooklands Road. And it had this very welcome, slight gentle downhill. That was around mile 19. And that was the point that I said to myself, right, how fast can you go now without going anaerobic? Or in other words, stay in the 160s. 169 is fine. Just don't get into the 170s. And I managed to do that. Got to mile 20. There was a lot of cheering and noise at that point. I think everybody realises that mile 20 is a critical part of the marathon. So that was much appreciated. Go. And then as for the final 10k, 20 miles marks the point where I can push on. That was always part of the plan. I can now go anaerobic, but also 20 miles is the point where it starts to feel really, really hard, no matter how controlled you've ran it up to this point. I start the 20 mile point at 2 hours 27, 40 seconds. I'm about 55 seconds behind where I wanted to be according to the plan. But to be honest, at this point, I've lost interest of where I am on the pace chart. I've got 6 miles left to run. I've ran 6 miles plenty of times, thanks very much. So it's just a case of getting on with it. But just looking back at the video footage, I am flying. Nobody's overtaking me. I'm catching up with loads of people. I'm overtaking them. And that's all because I've ran a controlled first 20 miles. So I'm looking to see if I can pace the last 10k at about 4 minutes 25 per kilometre. So I really start to push. I look down at the watch after a couple of kilometres. It's saying 4:26 is the current lap pace. So I think, great, keep pushing, try and get a little bit more. So I push a little bit more. A few kilometres later, it says 4:27. So I push even harder, and I'm definitely going faster. And then it says 4:28. So this is the point of the race where I realise, oh yeah, this is where you feel like you're running as fast as you can, but the reality is you're not going anywhere because it's the end of the marathon. But nonetheless, even at 36 kilometres, I'm still loving it. I manually lap at the 40 kilometre marker, and the watch is showing 4:29 per kilometre. I managed to squeeze in one last gel at 25 miles, and it's just an all-out effort for those last 2 kilometres to the finish line. I managed to pick up the pace just in that final kilometre, but interestingly, the heart rate, I couldn't get the heart rate up to max. The legs just weren't having it, which I suppose is no surprise for the marathon. I then crossed the finish line, and actually, I'm not feeling anywhere as bad as I did at the Brighton Marathon. So I've got a few training stats that I think are relevant to running a 3 hours 12-minute marathon for me. Tanda Race Predictor had me down for a 3 hours 14 minute and 23 seconds marathon, which ended up being 1 minute 41 seconds out. For the previous 8 weeks, I'd ran 681 kilometers, or averaged 85 kilometers per week at an average pace of 5 minutes 13 seconds per kilometer. The net heart rate efficiency peaked at 1.397 meters per beat. And then finally, the Garmin Watch Race Predictor had me down for a 3 hours 10 minute 50 second marathon prediction, which ended up being 1 minute 52 seconds out. And then finally, I would say that was an even split to negative split race in the end, which I was really pleased with. Which brings me to what I think is the most important tip that I've learned from this marathon, and that really is to try to aim to run those even splits or negative splits. You know, it's so true what they say, that the halfway point of a marathon is at 20 miles. I mean, I kind of knew this because I'd heard it before, but I hadn't quite realised it until running it myself. If you can get to 20 miles still staying aerobic, not going anaerobic at all, it will make life so much easier in the final 6 miles. That's certainly something that I'm going to do in future. And I guess it doesn't have to be 20 miles is the halfway point exactly. For me, it means running everything except the final 45 minutes aerobically, and then you can go anaerobic afterwards for the final 45 minutes. So whatever the final 45 minutes is, whether it's 6 miles, 5 miles, 7 miles, get to that point where you have not gone anaerobic. Because of that, I felt controlled throughout the whole race, and there wasn't a single point where I doubted that I would be able to finish. So that rounds up the video and the marathon training series as well. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed the race. I got what I came for. And at no point since crossing that finish line have I thought, I never want to do that again. I'm already pretty much signed up to doing all this again next year. See how much better we can do. But in the meantime, in the next few weeks and months, I'll probably just concentrate on the shorter stuff, maybe some 10K races and some half marathon races. Try and keep up the strength, put myself in a good position to start marathon training again at the end of the year. So all it leaves me to say is thanks so much for watching the video. Thanks so much for watching the series, and I'll see you in the next one.